Hey guys and gals, welcome to Miyagi Mornings episode 16. Yeah, that's right, 16 times. Now we've gotten together in the mornings here to talk about individual subjects. Today is one that actually was spawned by a response to a post that I did on Parler that I really didn't expect. Sometimes I do a post and I'm like, this one's gonna trigger people, and they get all triggered, right? So I used to make that into a GIF. Triggered! And make me a famous GIF. Anyway, so I did this post, and it was just basically the anarchist symbol, and it was a statement about what anarchy is, and I said something to the effect, if you think the assholes dressed in black burning shit down on TV are anarchists, you don't know anything at all about anarchy, something to that effect. And ended up with like 75,000 views and hundreds of comments and a bunch of triggered individuals, man. I mean, they were triggered by this because you're an idiot if you think anarchy can work. Well, as you saw if you looked at the title of this video, is you're probably an anarchist whether you know it or not. At least most of you are. At least in my audience, and even many people that consider themselves right-wing, small government, blah, 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 blah. If I ask you this simple question, there's two questions you can look at that will show that you're 1 degree or another of an anarchist. And one is, do you believe that taxation is theft? And that's an absolute. If you believe that, period, like there is no place for one person taking property from another person against their will through the use of force, then you are an anarchist. You just haven't figured out how it works yet. If you believe it's okay, I could debate that with you, but then maybe you're not an anarchist, right? I mean, that's pretty simple. And I would just say if you think it's okay, then I want to know this. How can a person, without a right, confer a right they do not have to another person? Because that's what voting is. If I don't have a right to come to your house and demand 15% of your shit, then I can't elect somebody to take 15% of your shit. Does that make sense? And all this social contract crap, I'm sorry, I wasn't there to agree to it. But let's take something a little bit easier to swallow for most people. If you believe in the basic principles of agorism, you're an anarchist. And that basic principle that I'm talking about today is, do you believe that two people have a right to trade with each other independent of any third party, if they want to? In other words, to make that really simple, do you think, let's say that you make really good cider and your neighbor grows a bunch of apples and your neighbor gives you apples and you give them cider, do you think that's okay? Or do you think that you should report that transaction to the Internal Revenue Service and pay taxes on it? Do you think that the Internal Revenue Service needs to know about that? Do you think the government needs to know about that transaction between you and your neighbor? No? Guess what? That's anarchism. And that's kind of my point today. I'm not an anarchist because I want to change the world to an anarchist, non-state. I'm not an anarchist because I want to impose my will of what I consider anarchy on you. I am an anarchist not because of how I think, but because of how I act, which is driven by how I think. And what I mean by that is plenty of things that I do, and probably things that you do every day, you could call very anarchist. When you're driving down the road and the speed limit says 55 and you're like, no, fuck that, there's no reason to do 55 here and I don't think I'm going to get caught by a cop, and you drive 65, you're being an anarchist. You're choosing to not obey the rules set above you because you're not recognizing the authority of the ruler to impose that rule on you. Okay? And you might slow down if you think you're going to get caught, but that's no different than you might be a little bit guarded if you have to walk through a dark alley thinking somebody might rob you. You see how that works? Every time you do anything that the government says you're supposed to do a certain way and you choose not to, you're being an anarchist. And I am an anarchist in as many ways as I can, not just through disobedience, but through lifestyle choices. Here's some examples. Number one, most people, the food you buy is almost 100% of it is subsidized by tax dollars. I've made a lifestyle choice. I don't consume grains. I only consume locally produced, grass-fed, etc. And therefore, the majority of the food I consume is not subsidized with tax dollars. That's an anarchist, conscious objection decision. Additionally, a huge portion of the meat that I acquire for my home, I barter for. I barter for it. I don't buy it. I barter for it. That's an act of anarchy because the system doesn't want that. I certainly don't tell the government, hey, I bartered for a steak today. That's anarchy. When I moved here, I sought a place to be as least dependent on the system as I possibly could. While I get electricity, and there is some subsidy in that, it comes from a private company, and I chose a competitive carrier, not the one the government said I had to. That's edgy, but it's, you could call it at least a little bit there. But I also chose a place where I have my own well, and I have my own septic system. I do not rely on the government for my waste or for my water. That's a decision. That's a conscious decision to do without government and to impose a private solution in my life. That's a choice. That's anarchy. Where I live, I also chose a place where, guess what? We have no government-provided garbage removal. How would you ever get rid of garbage? It turns out there's people who will voluntarily come get your garbage and take it away for you if you pay them money voluntarily. You don't actually need a third-party intermediary like the government. I'm an anarchist by using cryptocurrency, specifically privacy coins like Monero and R. If I have to explain to you how that works, you don't really know what cryptocurrencies are or Monero and R are, and that's not what today's subject is about. But by doing business in a completely private way, where transacting business is only between two people with no third-party intermediary and no reporting to the government, that's as anarchist and as agorist as fuck. See, so now I know what some of you are going to say, but you use the roads. You use the roads. Okay. You want to do a purity test? How about this? Do you ever cheat on your taxes? Okay, you don't pass the purity test. Do you ever speed when you're in your car? Okay, you don't pass the purity test. Do you ever conduct barter without reporting it to the government? Okay, you don't. See how that works? See, we got to stop thinking in this binary, like, ones and zeros world that we live in today. On, off, 1, 0, on, off, 1, 0. No. It's like a dimmer switch. How much of this can you incorporate into your life? I live as anarchist as I can in the world that I live in, with an expectation that there are certain things I need to do to protect myself. And again, if I'm walking down the road and somebody robs me, and instead of being able for me to draw down on them, they have, there's a guy there, a guy there, a guy behind me, and a guy over there, and all of them have a gun pointed at me at the same time, and they say, give me your wallet, and I know if drawing my weapon, I'm going to die. I got no choice. I'm going to give them my wallet. That does not mean that I see them as legitimate authorities in my life. And that's the big one. I deny the legitimacy of the state. That's what makes me an anarchist. Not because, I want to, you know what? If you want to live with Nancy Pelosi as your Speaker of the House, you get to do that. I'm an anarchist. I don't have the right to take that away from you. Do you see how that works? If you want to live with a boot on your throat, you have every right to live with a boot on your throat. I have every right to resist it. That's what anarchism is. It's not these jackasses on TV throwing shit through windows and people say, well, what would you do about that in anarchy? If it was an anarcho-society, those people would have got shot in the face the day that shit started, and those cities would not have burned. That's what would have happened. Because the right to your property is seen as valid. The peaceful, rightful property holdings that you have to be respected. And people that don't respect that, they say, well, they're leftist anarchists. They're anarcho-communists. Sorry guys, that's not a thing. That's not a thing, because you can't impose your will on others through force and be an anarchist because you're violating what's known as the non-aggression principle. And how are you going to impose your will on others to create a communist society without a state? You can't do it. You need a state to do that. If you have a state, you're not an anarchist. See how that works? I know they call themselves anarchists. I know it's generally recognized in the intellectual school of thought that there are, communist anarchists. And I'll tell you how communism anarchism works. I just haven't ever met a communist anarchist that's okay with this. Maybe a few of them are out there somewhere. I don't know. You do you, and I'll do me. If socialism is an adjective rather than a system imposed from a hierarchy, I have no problem with it. If you and all your buddies want to form a commune, if you want to form a collective that is beyond borders, with economic agreements between yourselves, and as long as you voluntarily engage in that, go ahead. Now, I'll tell you why they don't ever want to do it. They don't ever want to make the agreement back, so then I can go out and do all my anarcho-capitalist stuff if you feel the need to put a label on it, because they know it won't work for them. And they know it will work for me, because here's the final thing on how I know most people are anarchists at heart. And it is agorism that tells us this. Everything that we look at politically in general, it requires the imposition of a system by some form of authority to make it run. So taxation requires imposition. All right? Here we go. Agorism requires nothing but human beings left to themselves. You cannot show me a group of people anywhere in any condition at all ever that didn't engage in trade and commerce. Little kids set up lemonade stands. You put people in prison, they still engage in commerce. When they're not supposed to. Even when the system imposes a barrier to commerce, we as humans conduct commerce. Unlike most principles that we have in the world today that we see as, well, it came from God or it was ordained with this. We created all these systems. We made all these systems. We invented all these systems. Agorism was not invented by humans. It is what humans do. Put two kids together in a room, give them a stack of baseball cards, and see how long it takes before they start trading. And they don't need a third party. If you don't think you need a third party to conduct commerce, you're an agorist, and if you're an agorist, you're an anarchist. I know that may be hard to believe, but just because you don't know how to make it work yet doesn't mean it isn't what you really believe at your core. Do you believe that you can convey a right you do not have? If you say no, you cannot convey a right you don't have, you can't defend voting and you can't defend the state. You're in conflict with yourself. That's for you to resolve, not me. We'll catch up with you tomorrow with another one.